The heavy crystal glass filled with Macallan didn't shatter when it hit the Persian rug, but the dull, dead thud it made sounded exactly like the expiration of my 4-year relationship. 3 minutes earlier, I had opened Julian's iPad to sync the thermostat settings for our upcoming engagement party, only to find his iCloud photo stream updating in real time with a live photo of my younger sister, Chloe, wearing nothing but Julian's favorite gray cashmere sweater, laughing on the balcony of the Airbnb in Vermont he told me he'd booked for a solo architectural conference. Eleanor, you are overreacting, and quite frankly, your tendency to invade privacy when you feel insecure is becoming a pathological issue for this family. My mother, Martha Vance, didn't look up from her task of meticulously aligning the silver salad forks. We were in the dining room of my parents' colonial-style house in Shaker Heights, Ohio. The air smelled of roasted garlic, rosemary, and the stifling, expensive scent of Joe Malone's English pear Euphrasia, Martha's signature scent for family conflict resolution. She was in his sweater, Mom, I said. My voice didn't shake. As a senior landscape designer, I was trained to look at structural rot and assess the cost of removal without crying. The metadata put the location 40 miles outside of Montpelier, at 2:14 a.m. last night. Julian told me his phone battery died because he was surveying a remote cliffside project. Martha finally set the fork down. It made a sharp, clean xinghao against the mahogany table. She sighed, a delicate, practiced exhalation that she usually reserved for when a catering service delivered the wrong sort of smoked salmon. Chloe has been having severe panic attacks since her gallery rejection last month. You know this, Eleanor. Julian is an architect. He was in the area and offered to drive her up there so she could get some creative inspiration from the autumn foliage. The sweater? It was cold. Would you prefer your sister to catch pneumonia out of some archaic sense of property ownership? Property ownership, I repeated, the syllables tasting like ash. And besides, Martha continued, her tone shifting into that smooth, maternal authority that had managed 3 decades of suburban social politics, you cannot afford to blow this out of proportion right now. The Brooks and Vance families have over 200 guests arriving at the country club in 3 weeks. Your father's firm just secured Julian's partnership backing. We are talking about reputations, Eleanor. Real lives. Not just your habitual need to find fault in everyone around you. The front door clicked open. The sound of light, breathless laughter drifted from the foyer, accompanied by the heavy, masculine chuckle I had fallen in love with at a rooftop mixer in Chicago 4 years ago. Julian Brooks walked in first, looking every bit the rising star of Brooks U Associates. His navy-tailored blazer was immaculate, his stubble perfectly trimmed to convey an air of creative grit. Behind him was Chloe. She was 26, 3 years younger than me, blonde where I was dark-haired, and possessed an innate, fragile grace that made everyone in a room instantly want to hold her glass or pull out her chair. She was wearing an oversized beige trench coat, her lower lip tucked slightly under her teeth, her universal signal to the world that she was feeling vulnerable and required immediate protection. Oh, thank God, it smells amazing in here, Chloe murmured, immediately drifting toward Martha and wrapping her thin arms around our mother's shoulders. Hi, Mom. The drive through the valley was brutal, my nerves are absolutely shot. Julian's eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, just the briefest twitch of his left eyelid, I saw the calculations running behind his hazel eyes. He was assessing the room. He saw the iPad lying screen down on the sideboard. He saw my posture, spine straight, hands buried deep in the pockets of my tailored trousers. Eleanor, Julian said, his voice dropping into that rich, reassuring baritone that had once convinced me we could build a life together. He walked over, extending a hand to touch my waist. You missed a beautiful sunset over the ridge. I tried to FaceTime you, but the reception near the gorge was practically non-existent. I stepped back, just enough to make his hand hover in empty air. The rejection was subtle enough that Martha frowned, but Julian merely smoothed his palm against his trousers, his smile remaining perfectly intact. I saw the photos, Julian, I said, keeping my volume precisely at the level of a polite gallery chat. The ones from the balcony in Vermont. The room went completely silent except for the low hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Chloe stiffened against Martha's shoulder. She slowly let go of our mother, her fingers immediately flying to the ends of her long, honey-blonde hair, twirling a strand with frantic, rhythmic tugs. Eleanor, please don't start, she whispered, her eyes rapidly filling with a brilliant, dewy layer of tears. It wasn't like that. I had a massive episode at the cabin. I couldn't breathe. Julian was just being the brother I never had. He saved me from throwing myself into the lake, Eleanor. Literally. And you're looking at me like I'm a criminal. A brother, I murmured. Fascinating. I didn't realize brothers usually took photos of their sisters sleeping with their mouths slightly open, filed under a hidden folder named C on their cloud drive. Julian's smile didn't fade, but the skin around his jawline tightened until it looked like stretched parchment. Eleanor, that's enough, he said, his voice losing its warmth and adopting the firm, reprimanding tone he used with difficult contractors. We are in your parents' home. If you want to have an irrational, jealous episode based on a few misinterpreted artistic snapshots, we can do it at our apartment. Do not drag Chloe's mental health into your twisted competitive dynamic. My competitive dynamic. I almost laughed. It was a beautiful piece of gaslighting, really. Clean, efficient, and delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who knew he held all the structural advantages. Girls, please, Martha stepped in, her hands raised like a referee at a high society charity match. Your father will be home from the club in 10 minutes, and we are not doing this. Eleanor, look at your sister. She's shaking. Go into the kitchen and bring out the goat cheese tartlets. Now. I looked at the three of them. Martha, standing like a shield in front of Chloe, hiding behind our mother's shoulder, her eyes darting to Julian with a brief, hidden flash of something that wasn't fear at all, it was triumph, and Julian, the man I had slept next to for 48 months, looking at me with a cold, analytical detachment, already calculating how to spin this to his partners if I decided to call off the engagement. They thought I was going to scream. They expected the old Eleanor, the one who would tearfully demand explanations, lock herself in the bathroom, and eventually allow herself to be managed back into compliance for the sake of family harmony and the $50,000 non-refundable deposit on the country club ballroom. Instead, I took a deep, slow breath. I felt the rhythm of my heart decelerate. 星号 inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. 星号 the garden design principle. When the foundation is compromised beyond repair, you don't try to prop up the wall. You clear the site. You're right, I said softly, looking directly at Julian. It's cold outside. Chloe needed the sweater. I was being rigid. The shift was so sudden that Julian actually blinked. Chloe's hand stopped twirling her hair. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, trying to detect the trap. But there was no visible trap. My face was a perfectly rendered sheet of polished marble. Thank you, Martha said, her shoulders visibly dropping in relief as she adjusted her pearl necklace. Sanity prevails. Now, Julian, darling, come help me selection the wine for dinner. Your father wanted that Ardeba Cabernet. As they moved toward the wine cellar, Julian paused beside me. He leaned down, his breath warm against my ear, smelling faintly of the espresso and expensive peppermint he always consumed on long drives. Smart girl, he whispered, his hand briefly pressing into the small of my back with an ownership that made my skin crawl. We'll talk about your little trust issues tonight, okay? I love you. I love you too, I whispered back to the empty air as he walked away. I walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops were spotless. On the counter sat the Amazon Echo Show, its blue ring light breathing in a slow, rhythmic pulse, indicating it was connected to our smart home ecosystem. I pulled out my phone, opened the integrated home network app, and quietly checked the device logs. Because Julian was an architect obsessed with home automation, our apartment in the city, my parents' house, and his vehicle were all linked to the same master prom account, an account I had set up and managed for 3 years. My fingers flew silently over the screen. I didn't find the Vermont audio files yet. But what I did find was a series of automatic cloud uploads from Julian's new Tesla Model dashcam, synced via the garage Wi-Fi 20 minutes ago when they pulled into the driveway. I plugged in my wireless earbuds, turned my back to the dining room door, and hit play on the raw audio log from the car ride over. 星号, she's going to notice the mileage, Julian. 星号, Chloe's voice came through the earpiece, entirely devoid of the breathy, fragile tremor she had used 2 minutes ago. It was sharp, calculating, and cold. 星号, she's an engineer, she tracks everything. 星号. 星号, let her notice. 星号, Julian's voice replied, followed by the distinct sound of a leather seat shifting and a soft, wet gasp from my sister. 星号, Eleanor lives in a world of spreadsheets, Chloe. She doesn't have the stomach for a public scene. By the time the engagement party is over and the partnership with your dad is signed, she'll accept whatever arrangement I give her. She's too invested in being the perfect daughter to blow up her life. 星号. 星号, you promise? Because if she kicks me out of the guest house after the wedding, I have nowhere to go. Mom says she can't override Eleanor's deed on that property. 星号. 星号, trust me, babe. Eleanor does exactly what I tell her to do. Now come closer, 星号. The audio devolved into sounds I didn't need to hear to understand. I turned off the earbud. I took the tray of goat cheese tartlets from the oven. My hands were perfectly steady. They wanted a perfect daughter, a compliant fiancé, and a silent sister who would allow herself to be bled dry for the sake of the Vance family brand. They had no idea that the silent ones are the ones who know exactly where to bury the roots, so the whole house collapses from the bottom up. Eleanor. Martha called out from the dining room, her voice musical with false joy. Arthur is home. Bring out the appetizers, dear. Coming, Mom, I said, a beautiful, terrifying smile finally breaking across my face in the dark of the kitchen. By 9 a.m. on Monday, Julian's apartment, or rather, the luxury loft downtown that my salary paid 60% of the mortgage for, looked like a beautifully curated crime scene. I wasn't screaming, and I hadn't shattered his limited edition Bauhaus ceramics. Instead, I was doing what I did best, organizing. I stood in the center of the living room, a label maker in my right hand and a double-shot iced Americano in my left. Julian's fragile masculinity, I muttered to myself, typing the words into the small machine. It spat out a crisp, clear adhesive strip. I peeled the backing and stuck it onto a heavy cardboard box containing his collection of imported Italian silk ties, all perfectly rolled and color-coded from charcoal to dusty rose. When you spend 5 years designing high-end residential gardens, you learn that you cannot save a boxwood hedge that has been hollowed out by blight. You don't weep over the dead leaves, you dig up the root ball, throw it into the incinerator, and resoil the ground. Julian was the blight. Chloe was the parasite that had traveled on the wind to find him. The heavy oak front door groaned open. Julian walked in, his leather briefcase slung over his shoulder, a brown paper bag from the artisan bakery down the street tucked under his arm. He smelled of rain and fresh croissants, his peace-offering ritual whenever he spent too much money on a new wristwatch or, in this case, spent 48 hours sleeping with my sister. He stopped dead in the foyer. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the 8 identical, military-grade storage crates lined up by the exposed brick wall. Eleanor. He chuckled, though the sound was hollow, bouncing off the concrete floor. He set the bakery bag on the kitchen island. What is this? Are we remodeling? Because I told you, the minimalist Scandinavian aesthetic doesn't benefit from industrial storage bins. We aren't remodeling, I said, without looking up from my iPad. I was currently cross-referencing our shared digital calendar. You are relocating. Or rather, your belongings are. I've already contacted the building management. Since the lease is exclusively under my LLC for tax purposes, your access code expires at precisely noon today. Julian's face went through 3 distinct architectural phases in the span of 5 seconds: confusion, mild amusement, and finally, a cold, rigid calculation. He dropped his briefcase onto the floor. Eleanor, let's not do this again, he said, taking 2 long strides toward me, his hands reaching out in that patronizing, soothing gesture that usually made my defenses crumble. If this is still about Friday night at your parents' house, I thought we agreed you were just experiencing pre-wedding anxiety. Chloe is a child. She's unstable. I was trying to prevent a family crisis. Chloe is 26, Julian. She has a business license, a tax audit pending, and a very clear understanding of human anatomy, I replied, finally looking up. I handed him a heavy black binder. This is your inventory. Every pair of shoes, every architectural blueprint, and your ridiculous artisanal mustache wax. It's all accounted for. Sign the bottom page acknowledging receipt of property so I don't have to deal with your insurance company later. Julian didn't take the binder. He let his arms drop to his sides, his chest rising as he took a deep, aggressive breath. You are being hysterical. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Your mother is hosting the country club luncheon with my partner's wives tomorrow. If I'm staying at a Marriott, the entire Brooks U Associates merger falls apart before the papers are even signed. Then I suggest you call Chloe. I smiled, a tight, professional movement of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. I hear the guest house at the back of my parents' estate has excellent heating. Assuming she hasn't already moved someone else into it. Eleanor, stop it. He snapped, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. You're ruining everything over a hallucination. You have absolutely no proof of anything. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The ice rattled against the glass. I don't need proof to evict a tenant whose name isn't on the deed, Julian. This is a civil property matter. But if you want to talk about proof. I unlocked my phone and tapped the screen once. The sound of the loft's premium Sonos system kicked in automatically, but it wasn't playing the smooth jazz Julian liked for morning coffee. It was the raw, unedited audio from his Tesla dashcam from 3 nights ago. Xinghao, she doesn't have the stomach for a public scene. She's too invested in being the perfect daughter. Xinghao. Julian's own voice boomed through the yard decibel speakers, rich, confident, and utterly damning. Julian froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a time-lapse video of a winter storm. His mouth opened slightly, his hand hovering over the kitchen island as if searching for structural support. Where did you? He whispered, his voice cracking. You synced the car to my master smart home hub 3 months ago so you could use the automated garage opener, I said softly, stepping closer to him until I could see the tiny pulse throbbing in his temple. You're an architect, Julian. You should know that when you integrate systems, you share the data. Every time you turn that car on, it saves the interior cabin audio to my secure cloud server. I have 84 hours of you and Chloe discussing how you're going to use my father's firm to liquidate your firm's debt after the wedding. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The smooth, untouchable Julian Brooks had been completely dismantled by a 9-volt smart home routine. Now, I said, slapping the black binder against his chest. He took it automatically this time, his fingers trembling slightly. Sign the paper. The movers will be here in 20 minutes to take these boxes to your office downtown. I'm sure your senior partners would love to see the boxes labeled Julian's secret stash arriving during the morning board meeting. You won't play that for your father, Julian said, his voice dropping into a desperate, hushed growl. Arthur loves me like a son. If you destroy this partnership, you destroy his retirement plan. My father loves the idea of you, Julian. He loves the idea of a son who plays golf with a 4 handicap. Let's see how much he loves the son who called his favorite daughter a useful idiot in a registered vehicle. I checked my watch. 19 minutes left. He didn't sign the paper. He threw the binder onto the kitchen island, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass panels. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was clean. I sat down on the sofa, my hands finally shaking just a little bit. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. 4 years. 48 months of picking out furniture, discussing long aeration techniques, and planning a life with a man who viewed me as nothing more than a strategic acquisition. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Martha. 幸好 Martha, Eleanor, darling. Chloe is having another panic attack at the country club. She says you said something horrible to her on the phone. Your father is furious. We are having an emergency family meeting at the estate tonight at 7. Do not be late. And wear something appropriate, the Episcopalian bishop is stopping by later, 幸好. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the master cloud drive on my laptop and began downloading the audio files from the Tesla, alongside a secondary set of files I had discovered from the home security cameras in our guest house, the ones Chloe thought were turned off during her creative weekends. They wanted a family meeting. They wanted an intervention to make the difficult, rigid eldest daughter fall back into line so the town wouldn't gossip before the big country club party. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen island, and picked up the brown paper bag Julian had left behind. I pulled out a fresh, flaky croissant, took a large, deliberate bite, and smiled. If they wanted a performance for the bishop, I was going to give them an Old Testament revelation. The Vance family estate on a Monday evening looked like the cover of Xinhao Architectural Digest Xinhao, if the magazine were edited by an authoritarian regime obsessed with flawless boxwood hedges and expensive exterior lighting. I parked my Volvo behind my father's Jaguar. Through the large bay windows of the formal dining room, I could already see them gathered like a small, highly coiffed tribunal. I didn't wear the pastel cashmere sweater my mother had subtly hinted I should wear to look approachable. Instead, I wore a sharply tailored, charcoal gray wool suit and carried a sleek black leather portfolio. It looked less like I was attending an emergency family intervention and more like I was about to audit a failing bank. When I stepped into the foyer, the grandfather clock was chiming exactly 7 times. Eleanor, thank God, Martha whispered, appearing from the living room like a ghost draped in silk. She didn't hug me. Instead, she immediately checked my face for signs of tears or hysteria, looking slightly disappointed when she found none. Julian is already here. He's in the study with your father. The poor boy looks absolutely devastated, Eleanor. He said you had some kind of digital hallucination and threatened his career. Hi, Mom, I said, calmly hanging my coat in the closet. Where's Chloe? She's in the dining room, trying to calm her heart rate. She brought over a lemon chiffon cake she baked from scratch just to show you there are no hard feelings, Martha said, her voice dropping into that heavy, guilt-inducing register. Your father is on the verge of a migraine. The partnership announcement is supposed to be printed in the Xinhao Cleveland Plain Dealer, Xinhao, on Thursday. We cannot have a scandal over a misunderstanding about a sweater. It wasn't just a sweater, Mom. But let's go hear what the tribunal has to say, I said, walking past her toward the formal dining room. The dining table was laid out with Martha's finest porcelain. My father, Arthur Vance, sat at the head of the table, his gold-rimmed reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he reviewed some corporate documents. Julian sat to his right, looking remarkably composed for a man whose clothes had been delivered to his office in industrial storage crates 4 hours ago. He had a glass of scotch in his hand and wore an expression of deep, sorrowful concern. And then there was Chloe. She sat opposite Julian, wrapped in a cream-colored knit shawl that made her look small, fragile, and utterly breakable. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was gently stroking the edge of a silver dessert server. "Sit down, Eleanor," Arthur said, his deep voice carrying the weight of 30 years of corporate law experience. He didn't look up immediately. He liked to use silence as a leverage tool. When he finally looked up, his brow was furrowed in disapproval. "Julian has explained the situation to me. He admits he was careless with his digital security and that his behavior with Chloe in Vermont looked unseemly from an outside perspective. But he assures me it was entirely platonic, an act of care for a sister-in-law in crisis." "And you believe him, Dad?" I asked, sitting down at the far end of the table, placing my black portfolio flat on the mahogany surface. "Eleanor, look at the bigger picture here," Arthur said, leaning forward, tapping his signet ring against the wood. "Julian's firm is absorbing our secondary real estate portfolio. This merger secures your mother's trust, Chloe's art studio funding, and frankly, your own position as the lead designer for the new suburban development project. If you call off this engagement over jealousy, you aren't just hurting Julian. You are pulling the thread that unravels this entire family's financial stability." "Eleanor, please," Chloe chimed in, her voice trembling beautifully. A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light of the crystal chandelier. "I'll leave the city. I'll move to Chicago. Just don't ruin Dad's retirement and Julian's career because of me. It's my fault for being weak. I shouldn't have had that panic attack in his car. I shouldn't have worn his sweater. I'm so sorry." It was a masterclass in performance art. She was effectively casting herself as the tragic, self-sacrificing martyr while making me look like the cold-hearted executioner who would destroy her own family over a petty grudge. Julian reached across the table, his fingers briefly brushing Chloe's hand in a gesture that was supposed to look like comfort but felt sickeningly intimate. "Arthur, Martha, please don't be too hard on Eleanor," Julian said smoothly, turning his hazel eyes toward me with a look of patronizing forgiveness. "She's a perfectionist. She likes control. When she feels like she's losing control of a space or a relationship, she lashes out. I forgive her for the eviction. I'm willing to move back in tonight and proceed with the country club dinner tomorrow if she's ready to apologize to Chloe." Martha sighed with relief. "Oh, Julian, you are a saint. Eleanor, look at him. He's willing to look past your little episode. Say you're sorry, let's have some of Chloe's cake, and we can put this behind us." I looked at the four of them. The perfect suburban portrait. They had built a beautiful, fortified wall of financial interest and emotional manipulation around their shared secrets, and they honestly believed I didn't have the stomach to break it down. "You're right, Julian," I said, opening my black portfolio. "I do like control. And I love data." I pulled out a small, high-powered portable Bluetooth speaker, the premium Bose model I usually used to listen to Yo-Yo Ma while working in the garden, and set it in the center of the table, right next to Chloe's lemon chiffon cake. "Eleanor, what is that?" Martha asked, her brow furrowing. "The bishop will be here in 30 minutes, we don't need music." "This isn't music, Mom," I said, tapping my phone. The speaker let out a sharp "Xinhao beep Xinhao" as it connected. Instead of the dashcam audio from the Tesla, which I was saving for a larger audience, I played an audio file recorded by the hidden security camera located on the back porch of the guest house, dated 3 weeks ago. During the weekend I was away at a landscape symposium in Ann Arbor. "Xinhao, Arthur is at the club until 10, Julian, stop worrying." Xinhao, Chloe's voice came through the speaker, crisp and clear. There was no tremor in her tone now. It was husky, playful, and entirely mature. "Xinhao, if Eleanor finds out, she'll just cut off my allowance. She won't actually cancel the wedding. She's too terrified of Mom's disapproval." "Xinhao. Xinhao, I don't care about your allowance, Chloe," Xinhao, Julian's voice replied, followed by the distinct sound of a zipper being lowered and a low, guttural laugh. "Xinhao, I care about the deed to this guest house. Once the marriage certificate is signed, Arthur is transferring the property title to Eleanor and me as a wedding gift. I've already structured the contract so that I have 50% liquid equity. We can sell it, buy that loft in Manhattan you wanted, and tell Eleanor it was a necessary business liquidation." "Xinhao. Xinhao, oh, Julian, you're wicked. She thinks you love her garden designs." "Xinhao. Xinhao, her gardens are boring, Chloe. Just like her." "Xinhao." The audio continued for another 10 seconds, vivid, unmistakable sounds of a betrayal that had nothing to do with panic attacks or autumn foliage, before I tapped the screen and silenced the room. The silence that followed was different from the one in the loft. This silence was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Chloe's hand dropped from the silver server. The dewy, fragile expression on her face vanished, replaced by a sudden, ugly gray pallor. She looked like she had just been plunged into freezing water. Across the table, Julian's Scotch glass was trembling so violently that the ice cube clicked against the crystal like a frantic telegraph. Martha looked as if she had been slapped across the face with a wet towel. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from Chloe to Julian, and then finally to the lemon chiffon cake, as if hoping the dessert would somehow explain the horror she had just heard. "Arthur." Martha finally managed to whisper, her hand flying to her throat. "Arthur, tell me that's a digital fake. Tell me Eleanor altered that." My father didn't speak. His face had turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at Julian, his eyes narrowed into slits. Arthur Vance was a corporate lawyer. He knew the difference between a doctored file and a high-fidelity ambient recording. More importantly, he had just heard his prospective son-in-law outline a plan to fraudulently liquidate his family's real estate assets. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a register that made the crystal chandelier vibrate. "Is that your voice?" "Arthur, listen to me," Julian stammered, his smooth composure completely shattering. He stood up, knocking his chair back a few inches. That was taken out of context. We were joking. It was a roleplay scenario. Chloe was dealing with high stress, and we. A roleplay scenario about my real estate assets? Arthur rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the table. The corporate mask had slipped completely. "You miserable little parasite. You came into my house, drank my wine, used my daughter, and planned to steal my property?" "Dad, please." Chloe sobbed, finally breaking down, but this time her tears weren't dewy, they were frantic, ugly, and hysterical. She reached for Arthur's sleeve. "Julian manipulated me. He told me Eleanor didn't care about the house. He said he was doing it for us." "Don't touch me, Chloe," Arthur snapped, pulling his arm away with a look of profound disgust that I had never seen him direct at his favorite daughter before. "You've been lying to us for months. Every time you asked for money for art supplies, were you paying for hotel rooms with this man?" "No. Dad, no." Chloe curled into her seat, her fingers frantically twisting her hair until strands began to pull loose from her scalp. She looked completely unraveled, the fragile princess reduced to an exposed accomplice. Martha was covering her face, weeping softly into her linen napkin. "The bishop, the country club luncheon, what are we going to tell the partners' wives?" I stood up, calmly picked up my Bluetooth speaker, and slid it back into my leather portfolio. I looked at the chaotic scene, my father breathing heavily like a wounded bull, my mother grieving her social status, my sister hyperventilating in genuine terror, and my former fiancé realizing his entire career in this city had just hit a dead end. "The country club luncheon is still happening tomorrow, Mom," I said, my voice the only stable anchor in the room. "And you should definitely attend. Because if you don't, you won't be there when I play the rest of the recordings for the entire board of Brooks U Associates." Julian looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying blend of hatred and panic. "Eleanor, you wouldn't." "Try me, Julian," I said, throwing the portfolio strap over my shoulder. "I suggest you use the next 12 hours to draft your resignation from the firm. Because tomorrow morning, the data goes public." I turned and walked out of the dining room. As I reached the foyer, the doorbell rang. It was the Episcopalian bishop, arriving precisely on time. I opened the door, gave him a polite, radiant smile, and said, "Good evening, Bishop. They're waiting for you in the dining room. I believe they're currently discussing the nature of sin." I stepped out into the crisp, cool autumn night, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. By noon on Tuesday, the Canterbury Country Club's private dining room was suffocatingly warm, despite the autumn breeze rattling the French doors. The annual autumn charity luncheon was in full swing. The air was a thick cocktail of expensive catering, Chardonnay, and the distinct, high-society hum of 70 middle-aged women discussing golf handicaps and real estate. I sat at table 4, directly across from my mother and Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, Julian's mother, who was currently wearing a pastel pink Chanel suit and a smile that looked like it had been surgically pinned to her face. "Martha, darling," Evelyn murmured, leaning over her untouched endive salad, her pearls clinking against her diamond brooch. "Julian mentioned there was a small logistical disagreement about the apartment lease yesterday. I told him, young couples always bicker about space before weddings. But really, Eleanor, changing the digital locks seems a bit draconian, don't you think?" Martha's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Her face was the color of skim milk. She hadn't slept, the dark circles under her eyes were poorly concealed by a heavy layer of Estee Lauder concealer. She glanced at me, her eyes pleading, silently begging me to play the part of the compliant daughter for just 2 more hours. It wasn't a disagreement about space, Evelyn, I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my Sauvignon Blanc. I kept my voice at a smooth, conversational cadence. It was an audit. I found some structural irregularities in Julian's management of our shared resources. Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together. Irregularities? Julian is a senior partner track architect, Eleanor. He doesn't make mistakes with figures. He doesn't make mistakes with blueprints, I corrected gently, leaning forward. But his foundation calculations regarding family assets were deeply compromised. In fact, he's currently at the corporate office downtown, discussing those very calculations with the senior board. Before Evelyn could reply, a low, rhythmic vibration hummed from Martha's Chanel handbag. A second later, Evelyn's phone buzzed on the linen tablecloth. I watched their faces. It was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Evelyn picked up her phone. Her eyes flicked across the screen as she read the urgent text from her husband, a senior stakeholder at Brooks Associates. I already knew what it said. At 11:45 a.m., I had sent a password-protected Dropbox link to the firm's compliance officer, containing the Tesla dashcam audio where Julian explicitly detailed using the Vance family merger to cover his personal trading debts he had hidden from his own partners. The password to the file, fittingly, was 星号 Chloe, 2026 星号. The pink drained from Evelyn's cheeks. She stood up so fast her heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, drawing looks from the neighboring tables. Excuse me, she choked out, her voice suddenly sounding thin and brittle. I have to make an emergency call. She didn't walk out, she practically fled toward the powder room, her heels clicking frantically. Martha looked at me, her hands trembling so much she had to drop her napkin over her plate to hide them. Eleanor, you've destroyed his career before the main course is even served, she whispered, her voice thick with horror. Your father is at the bank right now trying to untangle the guest house deed. Why couldn't you have done this quietly? Behind closed doors? Because behind closed doors, Mom, you would have convinced Dad to forgive him for the sake of the country club invitation list, I said, standing up and smoothing down my blazer. Enjoy the lemon tart. I hear the kitchen did a wonderful job with the meringue today. I left the country club and drove straight to my apartment. I needed to pick up the remaining blueprints for my independent landscaping projects. I was cutting the ties, completely and cleanly. When I stepped into the building's lobby, I found Chloe sitting on the concrete steps by the mailboxes. She looked entirely different from the fragile princess who had wept in my parents' dining room the night before. She was wearing an oversized denim jacket, her hair tied back in a messy, greasy bun. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she held a half-empty paper cup of cheap gas station coffee. You think you're so smart, don't you? She spat, standing up as I approached. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual breathy sweetness. You think because you have the spreadsheets and the digital files, you win? This isn't a game, Chloe, I said, keeping my distance, my leather portfolio held firmly against my side. It's just the natural consequence of bad engineering. You build on sand, the structure collapses. You ruined my life. She screamed, stepping into my path. A resident walking past with a golden retriever stopped and stared, quickly pulling their dog away. Dad froze my credit cards this morning. He told me I have 30 days to vacate the guest house and find a real job. A real job, Eleanor. I'm an artist. I can't work a 9 to 5 because your ego got bruised. Your art funding was paid for by my design contracts, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping into that icy, professional register that always infuriated her. Julian didn't love you. He loved the fact that you were an easy backdoor into Dad's real estate portfolio. He told you that you were his muse because it was cheaper than paying a financial broker. That's a lie. She shrieked, her fingers clawing at the air between us. He loved me. He said you were like a block of concrete, cold, rigid, and impossible to live with. He came to my bed because I actually know how to make a man feel alive. Then you should go to him now, I said calmly, stepping around her toward the elevator. He's currently sitting in the parking lot of Brooks Associates with his personal belongings packed into the trunk of his car. His partnership was revoked 40 minutes ago. You two can move into a studio apartment together over by the industrial yards. I hear the autumn foliage is lovely over there. The elevator doors opened with a soft 星号 ding 星号. I stepped inside and turned around to face her. Chloe stood in the middle of the lobby, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and dawning desperation. For the first time in her life, she was completely uncovered. There was no mother to shield her, no father to write a check, and no handsome fiancé to validate her victimhood. She was completely, utterly alone in the cold glare of the fluorescent lobby lights. As the silver doors began to slide shut, she took a frantic step forward. "Eleanor. Please. You can't leave me like this. Tell Dad it was a mistake. Tell him you made it up." "I don't make things up, Chloe," I said softly as the doors closed, cutting off her voice. "I just record them." Upstairs in the quiet of my empty loft, I walked over to the glass windows overlooking the city. The sky was turning a heavy, bruised purple. A classic Midwestern storm was rolling in from the lake. My phone rang. It was Julian. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, watching the screen light up as the speech-to-text app transcribed his final, desperate message. "Xinhao Eleanor, please. Arthur withdrew the firm's capital. I'm ruined. Let's talk. Just you and me. At the lake cabin. For old time's sake. I can explain everything, I swear. Xinhao." I deleted the voicemail. I opened my laptop, clicked on the master folder containing the full, unedited 84 hours of audio data, and queued the final payload for the ultimate family gathering. They thought the storm had already passed. They thought the country club scandal and the dissolved partnership were the worst of it. They didn't understand that a landscape architect doesn't just cut down the dead branches. You dig up the entire lawn before you plant the new garden. The Thanksgiving Eve dinner at the Vance estate was supposed to be a quiet, defensive gathering, a desperate attempt by Martha to patch up the visible cracks in the family facade before the winter social season. There was no bishop tonight. There were no country club partners. There was only the heavy, suffocating silence of 4 people sitting around a 20-pound roasted turkey that nobody had the appetite to carve. My father sat at the head, his face haggard, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. Martha sat opposite him, her eyes fixed on the silver gravy boat, her fingers nervously smoothing the edges of her linen napkin. Chloe sat to my left, slumped in her chair, staring at her empty plate with a dull, hollow expression. She had stopped twirling her hair, her hands lay dead in her lap. And then the front door bell rang. Martha's head snapped up, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "Arthur, did you invite someone? Is that the neighbors?" "I didn't invite anyone," Arthur growled, setting his carving knife down with a heavy thud. "I did," I said smoothly, standing up from my seat. "I invited Julian. He said he wanted an opportunity to explain himself to the whole family. It seemed appropriate to do it tonight, before the holiday." "Eleanor, are you insane?" Chloe whispered, her voice cracking as she finally looked at me. "After what you did to his firm. He hates you." "He doesn't hate me, Chloe. He's desperate," I said, walking out to the foyer to open the door. Julian Brooks stood on the porch. The autumn rain had soaked through his wool coat, and his hair was damp and messy. The polished, charismatic architect who had once charmed the entire country club was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he had been living out of his car for 3 days. His hazel eyes were bloodshot, fixed on me with a mixture of intense resentment and frantic hope. "Eleanor," he breathed, stepping into the warm foyer without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. I can make this right with your father. I've restructured the merger proposal. If Arthur puts the capital back." "Come into the dining room, Julian," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a midnight radio broadcast. "Everyone is waiting." When Julian walked into the dining room, Arthur stood up so fast his heavy mahogany chair scraped violently against the floor. "What is he doing in my house? Get out before I have the police remove you for trespassing." "Arthur, please, just 5 minutes," Julian pleaded, raising his hands, his voice dropping into that familiar, desperate baritone. He looked at Martha, then at Chloe, trying to find a weak link in the defensive wall. I was set up. The audio files Eleanor sent to the board, they were heavily edited. It was a digital fabrication designed to destroy my reputation because she wanted to back out of the marriage contract. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical laugh from her seat. "A fabrication? Julian, you told me on that tape that my art was boring and that you were just using me to get the title to my guest house. Was that a fabrication too?" "Chloe, I was trying to protect you." Julian snapped, turning on her, his mask slipping completely. "You were the one throwing yourself at me because you couldn't pay your gallery rent. You think I actually wanted to spend my weekends listening to you whine about your anxiety? You were a distraction. Julian. How dare you?" Martha shrieked, standing up, her maternal protective instinct finally overriding her obsession with social etiquette. "In my house? At my table? Your house?" Julian laughed, a bitter, ugly sound that echoed off the high ceiling. He took a step toward Arthur. Your house is built on my blueprints, Arthur. If I go down, I take your secondary real estate portfolio with me. I know about the offshore tax filings you used to fund Chloe's studio. I've already copied the ledger from your study. The room went completely, utterly cold. Arthur's face turned an ash-gray color. He looked at Julian, his jaw working silently, realizing too late that he had allowed a viper into his financial vault. They were all standing now, screaming, crying, exposing every hidden piece of rot and mutual blackmail they had spent decades concealing under the guise of a perfect, wealthy suburban family. Chloe was sobbing into her hands, Martha was hyperventilating, Arthur was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white, and Julian was grinning, a desperate, ruined animal trying to drag everyone down into the pit with him. I stood at the far end of the table, watching the entire structure tear itself apart from the inside. I didn't need to play another tape. I didn't need to bring out another spreadsheet. When you remove the retaining wall, the mountain collapses under its own weight. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, tapped the screen once to stop the live audio stream I had been broadcasting directly to the senior compliance officer at Brooks U. Associates and the local district attorney's economic crimes unit, and slid it into my pocket. "Goodbye, Julian," I said softly over the noise. "Goodbye, Mom. Dad. Chloe." Nobody heard me. They were too busy drowning in their own secrets. I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps light against the Persian rug. I grabbed my black leather portfolio and my wool coat from the foyer closet. I didn't look back at the grand chandelier, the oil paintings, or the perfect boxwood hedges outside. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the heavy oak door behind me, the sharp click of the lock sounding like the final punctuation mark on a 29-year chapter of my life. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and clean, cold winter wind. My Volvo was packed with everything I owned: my design portfolios, my clothes, and my favorite vintage gardening tools. I started the engine, turned the heater on high, and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the illuminated Vance estate behind in my rearview mirror. As I drove toward the interstate, heading east toward a new city and a fresh piece of land where I could build something real from the ground up, I felt a deep, slow breath fill my lungs. No anxiety, no need to manage the unmanageable. Just the clean, silent, empty road ahead.